Can you? Hi everyone, welcome to Art Basel Conversations. My name is Jenny Fulton. I'm Art Basel's executive editor, and I'm very proud to introduce the following conversation, which is entitled My Body, My Choice. In today's America, it's a highly relevant, highly politicized topic where long-won freedoms are slowly being eroded due to legislation being passed by the current state governments. We remember the recent cases in Ohio where a medically impossible procedure was trying to be forced through court, or in Alabama, where abortion is all but made illegal. We have an incredible panel here. We have Marilyn Minter, the artist, in the middle. Then Alexandra Natale on the right, who is the Special Events and Strategic Partnerships Manager at Planned Parenthood, New York City. And then finally, Catherine Morris, who is the Sackler Senior Curator for the Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Art of the Brooklyn Museum in New York City. We are still waiting for the artist Nandipha Mntambo. That's why there's an empty chair there, but we are sure that she's somewhere in the building and will be joining us very shortly. Toby, our conversations manager, is nodding at me. Okay, very good. So maybe if you guys want to kick off, and then Nandipha will be with us very soon. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Toby. Thank you, Ed, and everybody here at the fair for having us to have what I think for all intents and purposes might be a kind of unusual conversation, but incredibly timely and incredibly valuable to talk about women's bodily autonomy in relationship to art and activism. As we know, so many of the most important artists working today are, in fact, simultaneously activists and artists. And so, could I have the first slide, please? I just, per Jen's comments, just thought that this Instagram posting would be a great place to start. Most of us saw the headline, as Jen just said, over this Thanksgiving holiday about the Ohio bill that, if passed, will order doctors to reimplant ectopic pregnancies or face abortion murder as a new sort of legal term in our world. The trap laws and targeted restrictions we've seen dramatically on the rise since 2010 over, I think, 44 states, and the District of Columbia have imposed impossible restrictions on women's healthcare doctors that are not imposed on any other sort of medical facility in this country. We all remember the great moment Wendy Davis took her courageous stand in Texas. I think we'll talk about that in a few minutes. I think that's a great starting point for some of Marilyn's thoughts. So obviously we need this conversation. Women's access to healthcare and our reproductive rights are an urgent topic, and we need to talk about the challenges women face in gaining access to safe and affordable healthcare, including abortion. In the context of Art Miami Basel, we also need to be able to talk about how artists find multiple points of entry into contexts that are both political and personal, and that include multiple voices and life experiences. I'm going to start, actually, while we're waiting for Nandipha to arrive, I'm going to start with you, Marilyn, because you're the next slides. I think we may have to scroll through Nandipha's slides, if possible, to get to Marilyn's. And while we do that, Marilyn, could you tell us a little bit about your entree into political activism, specifically in relationship to all of the work you've been doing to support Planned Parenthood?
Well, I think this is working, yeah. Well, thank you all for coming. It's a very impressive crowd, and I'm glad you're here. I think we should keep going with the slides until we get to those buttons that I made back in, I guess 5 years ago. And I don't know if you can read them, but it says, "Don't fuck with us, don't fuck without us," with a Planned Parenthood symbol at the bottom. And I was the trap laws are targeted. What is it? Targeted restrictions against abortion. And I would listen to NPR and talk radio while I'm painting. And I really thought this was something I put to rest in 1973. I didn't really see anyone really trying to overturn Roe v. Wade in all of this time until the Bush administration, and even, they just started systematically chipping away at abortion rights in basically states that are ruled by poverty, and places in Texas. And Wendy Davis stood for 24 hours or something
13 hours, I think?
Yeah, 13 hours just with the back brace on. Yeah, and we were all cheering her on. But I'd already made this buttons because I saw this. I didn't think of "Don't fuck with us, don't fuck without us," but I saw it somewhere in Planned Parenthood literature, and I said, "Oh, can I have one of these buttons? Can we make some buttons?" And they said, "Oh, we can't make those official buttons." So I said, "Well, I'll just make them." We sell them in printed matter if you want them. And the printed matter in New York City and another place in LA, which just closed, but I think they're going to reopen again.
So you often refer to yourself as a political junkie.
Well, I've always been a political junkie. I've been in activism since I was 16, and I did clinic defense for Planned Parenthood, and I knew. I mean, I'm old, and I'm 71, and I knew people who went to the nurse in Jacksonville to get an abortion before abortion was legal, and I had I had my own scares, but in 1973 Roe v. Wade passed, and it was like this big, exhale in the South, the places I'm from.
Everywhere.
Yeah, well, in New York City, I don't know, or they think they had limited abortions in Connecticut and New York City, but people my age went to Puerto Rico or Mexico or someplace, where it was unsafe and illegal in this country. And it's still, if they ban abortion, it's still going to be people are always going to be having abortions.
So I want to get back to a question for you in a second about relating your activism to your art making and how you see those two operating. But first, I just wanted to have Alex, if you could jump in, because I know that your bio says that you connect artists, tastemakers, and brands to the critical work of Planned Parenthood, raising funds and visibility. Can you tell us about the vision for the active links between art and activism and what the future of that might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. I think for us at Planned Parenthood, the reason why we're so proud to work with artists and why it's so powerful is that, like Marilyn has said, this fight has existed for so many years, and art really gets the point across in a way that us ringing the alarm over and over again. I mean, just this summer alone, you saw 6-week bans in Georgia, in Ohio, in Alabama. We can ring the alarm as much as possible, and while those headlines are really frightening, it's hard for people to access abortion every single day in this country. Even in a place like New York, where abortion is protected, we still have folks who struggle to access healthcare because of their means. So for us, it's really finding that intersection of how can we get people to pay attention and understand that this is an issue and be committed to fighting for it every single day.
And I know we have a couple of examples of that specifically, but I'm trying to toggle between asking questions and also the order that I know the slides are in.
Yeah.
So maybe we could go to the next slide.
So back in listening to these trap laws, it's a long story, but I started working with Planned Parenthood, and mainly because I was taking pictures for Keels, and I said, well, just donate the $20,000 they were going to pay me for a day rate to Planned Parenthood, because Keels doesn't advertise, but they do tell you to pick a charity.
Wait. So you were hired by Keels to do a job, and you asked them if your fee could be donated.
Yeah, because they, like Jeff Koons did it and gave his fee to children's charity. And it's been a really long time okaying this. This was at least 5 years ago, right? And then we made these bags that sold for $20, and we sold them immediately, 500 bags. And I said, oh, can we do 500 more? And this is a prominent brand, and L'Oreal owns Keels, and literally L'Oreal said no. And I thought, I was furious. L'Oreal is a woman's brand of makeup and products all aimed at women. And I thought, wow, Planned Parenthood is really beat up all over the country at this point. And it was always just a little chipping away at the layers. So I got together with my friend Gina Nanny, who's an activist, and we did choice works at Sotheby's, and we got all these artists, and we targeted the ones that make the most money. Richard Serra, Richard Prince, and of course, the very first one who gave us a $350,000 painting was Cecily Brown. But guess who the next one was? Anyone want to guess? $350,000 painting. Richard Prince. Surprise, right? Yeah, he's a huge women's rights activist and Planned Parenthood supporter. he's done a lot for Planned Parenthood. And, and we sold everything. And we raised over $3 million on this section over two. And then Gina went on to raise up to $12 million. For, not her, but Planned Parenthood and Gina. She's here in the audience. So can you go to the next one, please? And so I started making these T-shirts with Miley Cyrus. Can you, next one, please?
Wait, before we get to that, I just want to frame this a little bit. So I think that the idea of a sale of works of art to raise funds for a political cause is a tried and true kind of method that many of us know, and many of us have bought works at auctions and stuff like that. I'm interested in the process of your telling these stories. If you could also tell us how your studio practice and how your work, how you see it interacting with your political activism, if you do.
Well, I have different threads. I want to think of myself as someone with different threads. I definitely have anger and I have humor. You know, and I don't tell people what to think, but I do want these multiple reads. And I've always thought it's stronger to be, well, I've read all of these different, there's a quote from Margaret Atwood that women are afraid of being attacked. That's what they find. Women are most afraid of being attacked, and men are most afraid of being laughed at. So I thought, well, humor is really powerful. And so everything I do, I try and ingest a little bit of humor into it.
Well, it's also very
Absurdity.
Moving about that for you, or for me, knowing your career, is that you have found yourself attacked at multiple points throughout your career.
Horribly.
So,
yeah.
So the ways in which I think that experience from your earliest work of being seen as sort of outside of orthodox political positions in terms of imagery and women's sexuality and pornography has probably put you in a great position to sort of take this on.
Well, it's interesting. This next slide, please. Miley Cyrus was the only young woman who would put her name on Planned Parenthood back in like 5-6 years ago, and she went on. She posed for the picture, and we sold, I think, 45 photos of her, $5,000 each. All the money went to Planned Parenthood, I got trolled, but she got trolled so bad, and she didn't care because she's a real activist. She already had Happy Hippie organization, which supported abandoned gay youth for being queer. So could you go to the next one, please? So this is another project. The trolling, by the way, I learned most of it were bots. This was before there was any crackdown on politics, that are coming from, and they were like they were just like, eat bleach, to me, or you baby killer. And Miley's was just reams and reams on Instagram. But if you looked a week later, they were gone. And so I learned from Planned Parenthood that most of them are bots. Yeah. And so don't even interact. So then Trump got elected. And then I had been sort of dormant activist since, I guess, Clinton. And then Obama. I worked for Obama, but I wasn't really an activist against until Trump got elected. And so,
which happened, by the way, as we were installing or opening
my show at the Brooklyn Museum, my retrospective. So at the Brooklyn Museum with Catherine, and no other museums would touch us, but my good friend Adriana Campbell is a curator, and we got all these really famous artists to make $3 items or $20 T-shirts, or I think the most expensive item was $50, and we raised about $50,000. But they could give the money either to Planned Parenthood or to ACLU.
So you go from the extreme. You go from the $350,000
one
Cicely
painting,
Bryson piece to the $3 buttons that we could sell at the Brooklyn Museum.
And the artists would do it because we could raise a lot of money as artists, but as long as you don't do an auction. You just try and, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, our next plan of action. Can you show the next one, please? Next slide. Oh, yeah, here's anger management. And I love the idea of having some humor involved. Like one of the artists, Laurie Simmons, made delicately, next one, please. She made delicately embroidered resistance thongs. And I think there's one out there, that little blue, for the Christmas. Okay, next one, please. I love this T-shirt. This is Viva Riaz, who is working. She's working on her own, and we've been we're doing a couple of projects together. And this is one of my favorite sayings, but I think it's a little. It might be too much for the general public, but I love it because I want to take the shame out of abortion. Next one, please. And then the last work I've been doing once Trump got elected, of course, was I did this video called My Country 'Tis of Thee, and this is the same thing, but if we're going to be called cunts, let's shove it down their throats. And I had all of these different women writing no country for old men, or cunt foo, or oh country. I think the next slide, please. Now this is a show that I'm really proud of that we're going to do with Yasmin Wahi, who is here. And can you show me, it's opening on January 9th at Eva Preston-Hubler. Can you show me the next slide? This is my finished. Oh, that's not
my slide.
Oh, yeah, it's like the back one.
Yeah, we've got a little bit out of order here, sorry.
So choose your own adventure.
Yeah, okay, then I'll just tell you a little. Yasmin is the curator. We're doing it at Eva Preston-Hubler, and you want to stand up and turn around? Or I can give you the mic. Yeah, and you want to talk about the show? I wanted to call it Thank God for Abortion, but people freaked out.
Okay, I'll just share very quickly. The show is called Abortion is Normal. It'll open at Preston Hooper Gallery on January 9th, and then a second half of the show will open on the 18th at Arsenal Gallery in New York. And really, it's an exhibition about reproductive rights, but also more generally about body autonomy, agency over our own bodies, and how the issue of reproductive rights is not just limited to people who can get pregnant, but is really something that we are all part of in a conversation that's really significant for all of our futures. So we all have a stake in the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin.
Which is a great entree
Yes,
into
wonderful.
Alex
Can you
to
show me
talk a little bit. We could move on in the slides. I think that, yes. I think it's a great place to jump off and talk about the ways that bodily autonomy and individual choice are about a whole lot more than one aspect of women's health. And if you could tell us a little bit about the ways that you've combined activism and the kind of visual in relationship to your work.
Yeah, gladly. And just as a starting point, I think you hear these huge numbers of how Marilyn has brought the art community together to raise so much money for Planned Parenthood. And to put that in context, at our health centers in New York City, we have 5, one in each borough. We need to raise $10,000 a day to make sure that everyone who walks through our doors can access the care they need. So while these numbers might seem abstract, to us they're really real, and it's the difference between someone feeling anxious when they walk in and not knowing if they're able to cover their procedure that day, and us being able to say, you're covered, we've got you, it's taken care of. So thank you, Marilyn, that's huge and for everything. Yeah, clap for Marilyn, please. But to that point, I'm really proud to show what I think is a really tremendous example of the lasting political impact art can have on healthier communities. This is our Keith Haring Foundation Project Street Beat Mobile Medical Unit, and this is a project that grew directly out of HIV and AIDS organizing in the 80s and 90s. This is a 30-year-old program. It drives around New York City, reaching underserved communities, folks who are living and working on the streets of New York City and are not likely to visit a bricks and mortar health center for any variety of reasons. It operates on a harm reduction model, so we do a needle exchange on site, we can give people health care on site, we can do almost the full range of sexual and reproductive health care on this unit, barring surgical abortion. But if you want to come in for a birth control implant, we've actually been able to update our mobile medical unit so you can have that procedure on the unit that day, which is incredible. And in addition to that, they also meet people where they're at and give them basic things like toothbrushes, deodorant, like things they might not have access to otherwise. So it's really rooted in serving the community. And something else that makes it really special is most of the folks who staff these units are people who've at one point been served by the program. So, and we're so proud of them. They're beautiful. They're wrapped in this beautiful Keith Haring print, and folks really know to look out for this unit, and it's a staple in their community. So I think that's just one great example of a legacy of political organizing that directly helps folks access healthcare every day.
Exactly. It's a wonderful example of something that you can see and you identify as Keith Haring, but you also identify him with his activism and with the activism that transcends gender and transcends sort of need. So that's a great example. And then I think we have one more slide.
Yes. This, I just wanted to sort of set the stage for where we are nationally and what's at stake and why this work is so important right now. So on March 4th, the Supreme Court will hear an abortion access case that will have huge implications for the future of how and if people are able to access abortion in this country moving forward. It's actually really alarming because they heard an almost identical case in 2016 called Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt that struck down a similar provision. So the fact that they're even taking it up says that they might break with precedent, and if they do, it's a fair game. There are 19 other cases on the docket waiting to go to the Supreme Court if this does go through. So this is what our country would look like in abortion access if Roe were to fall. At least 21 states would completely lose access to abortion. And this is a projection put together by the Center for Reproductive Rights based on current laws on the books and then also state governors' positions. And then you see there are a number of states that are severely restricted. And I think in this future, severely restricted, we should take that as it is going to be nearly impossible to access abortion. For us in New York, we passed the Reproductive Health Act last year. Marilyn spoke earlier about access in the 70s. New York actually passed its abortion laws in 1970, so 3 years before Roe, and that's great, but we did not update them until 2019. So abortion was still in our criminal code up until this January. So in New York, we're really trying to hold the line and provide access to folks who will be traveling from out of state. We've already seen a doubling in our out of state patient numbers. And so this is what is really at stake and why we go to work every single day and why we're so proud to have partners in the art field to really protect what is a dire moment for reproductive rights.
Thank you. Nandy's here, yay! Thank you.
Oh, I'll take this one.
Could we go back to the beginning of the slides, please?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well,
thank
good
you.
afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here.
I'm so sorry. What can I run?
Next one, please. And this is actually a wonderful transition because one of the things, Nandy, that we've been trying to talk about, or I've been trying to sort of get us to, and I think that your work will really help us, is also thinking about the ways in which artists, we've been talking until now, I think very overtly about politics, but I'm also interested in talking about how individual artists imagine and use the female figure and think about the way that the autonomy of women is presented in their work. And I think that your particular body of work having to do with a woman taking the position of a bullfighter and sort of this interaction with dance as a kind of very poignant moment is something that comes up in this particular body of work. So could you tell us a little bit about it, please?
Okay, thank you.
Of course, if you need to breathe for a second or have some water, that's...
Good morning. Sorry to be late. I'm a little bit jet lagged. So this is the reason for me being late. But thank you for coming. Well, I suppose, working in the field of sculpture is quite a complex thing because when I was at art school, there was a kind of push to make me a painter or to get me interested in printmaking, for instance. But sculpture was the thing that sort of caught my attention. And I think that, just trying to understand the politics of representation was something that was quite complex for me. So I think that, when you use somebody else's body within your work, you have a particular idea, but that idea may not necessarily be represented to them in the way that you're imagining it. So it made sense for me to use my own body within my work because that kind of conversation became something that I didn't need to do. And so I think within using my own body and looking firstly at the female body, looking at the black female body, and being forced, because I'm not a person who initially started thinking, okay, black female body politics. But being in a situation where your work is out in the world and these are the kind of stereotypes or the baggage that we carry as a people, I needed to I guess, take responsibility for the fact that my work was out there in a way, and kind of own that space, you know, which is something that took me a little while. And working within the field of performance, working within the field of photography, I think has also made me more aware of the fact that the body politic is quite a kind of complex space. And, you know, I think taking ownership of oneself and one's body is where I'm at the moment.
Thank you. Can we have the next slide, please? And the next? Actually, we're going to scroll through this particular, yes. And so I think this is a perfect image to have on the background as we talk. Could you tell us a little bit about this particular image? Because it's sort of not purely human.
Yeah, well, I suppose within taking ownership of that space, the series of works that you saw before, I was interested in bullfighting because of the fact that I suppose my kind of main focus is the sort of merging or the space where animals and humans intersect. You know, within mythology, within how I think human beings have existed over time, there have been that kind of, that space where animals and humans either become one, or the stories of how animals and humans live together. And so I got interested in that space of bullfighting because of the fact that I think human beings have an interesting way of wanting to separate themselves from the fact that we're able to kill. And the strange thing is that because we're animals, that's one of our first sort of instincts, you know, as a protective mechanism, I suppose. And then I was able to go to Portugal. Well, actually, the series that you saw was shot in Mozambique, and so I was interested in that space with the Portuguese bullfighter. And then I was able to go to Portugal and kind of stay with the family who was part of the bull breeding space. So the father used to be a bullfighter, and he was training his son as a bullfighter now, but they were part of the bull breeding area of, so now they were into bull breeding. And the interesting part of when it came to the fact that, you know, I was there for a while, I couldn't speak Portuguese, the kind of being lost in translation with the father was something that was a big issue. And then when I eventually was able to tell him that I wanted to have him train me as a bullfighter, he was like, no, you're a woman, I can't do it. And so that kind of space of what men do versus what female people do was really highlighted to me at that time. And so I had to come home and kind of pretend to be this bullfighter. And then this work came at around the same time, where in a way I was having an internal conflict around how do I kind of form my own language within the art space, and how do I kind of figure out the space of what men are supposed to do versus what women are supposed to do. And I suppose because at art school we learned art history at the same time, I was interested in that space of mythology. And then the Minotaur became the animal that I was really interested in at that time. So I decided to create this creature of myself as this animal. So kind of dealing with that whole space of the internal conflict versus the conflict, I suppose, that one has as a human being with one's space. So I created Europa.
Next question. I'm sort of jumping around between so many thoughts now. One of the things that I think that's come up for me in all of these conversations is the idea of, in relationship to feminism and to politics and to representation, is kind of who the audience for these works are, or who the audience are in mind when we are doing the things we're doing, whether it's political action or work in the studio. And Marilyn, you brought up your relationship experience with Miley Cyrus in this conversation. I'm wondering about if each of you could maybe tell us a little bit about who you imagine your audience for these various works are. If it's, in your case, a younger generation, how does the younger generation and the older generation deal with the activism that you're involved with? And then just sort of who are you imagining when you're having these conversations?
Oh, well, I personally think that we live in a bubble in New York City and Connecticut and the tri-state area, and Florida looked like one of those, that was the one that no access, right, if Roe v. Wade, or very limited. And I was thinking about, we don't really think about underserved communities in Missouri or Alabama. And I think that my generation lived through seeing abortion being illegal. And the younger generation has been taking it for granted all of these years. And I think that the far right has been very wise in chipping away slowly through legislating at state level and putting all these Republicans in state office. And I think the younger generation really can't even have a concept of what it's going to be like if Roe v. Wade is overturned. And I'm at the place now of being a propagandist, trying to wake people up. And I really see in from my social media, so many people don't even realize that it's at risk, or that it's even going to be limited, and very limited in cases of just rape or endangered.
And even now,
pregnancy.
the new bans, the 6-week bans, are particularly cruel, and there's no exemptions for rape or incest. So if you're looking at a severely limited landscape, what is the exemption then?
And what if you're a 16-year-old kid in Texas that has to drive 8 hours and wait 3 days, and you have no money and no support? Planned Parenthood really does serve people that, students and young people, and people that want to, don't want shame involved in owning their own body and their own reproduction. And the idea that, I really want to wake up the idea of people that think the patriarchy is going to take care of them, and that is just a false narrative that's all over the world. And I think it's important to be a propagandist at this point, because we've got this evangelical right being a propagandist for their position, and throwing shame on all these young girls. And it's just something I feel that I can't even. If I don't do anything, it makes me feel terrible. So activism for me is a selfish gesture. I've got to do the best I can while I'm still alive. So that's who I'm targeting, my audience.
I think similarly for us at Planned Parenthood, it is what is really going to get people to pay attention, because the stakes are so high. And I think, again, it is so meaningful to have people outside of our Planned Parenthood staff or immediate community using their medium to say the same thing. And then on a personal level, everyone I love goes to Planned Parenthood. Our services are so important. I'm a proud patient, and knowing that I get to go to work every day and protect access to this care to people I really care about and cherish is, what gets me up in the morning.
Well, I guess for me, within the context of South Africa and the world, it's been quite a complex thing, to kind of use my body within my work. There was an incident a couple of years ago with a Minister of Arts and Culture who I guess didn't appreciate how she understood what I was doing. And so there was a show that, her name was Lulu Qingwane, and there was a show where a series of work of mine was on a series of photographs that she felt were pornography. And so the interesting thing for me within that point, or within that moment, was that it made me really understand that the politics of the body within the context of South Africa especially are really complex. I really thought that I had a kind of wide audience of people, and I thought that, especially as a Minister of Arts and Culture, a person who is supposed to be kind of supportive of what we do as artists, she would have a kind of broader understanding of what the politics of the body means, the politics of the black female body. And she decided not to open the show because she felt offended by some of the imagery that she saw. And I think the kind of complex thing of working within a space where we have this imagined idea of freedom, but in actual fact, within how individual people understand what it is to be free, it's just not clear. Like we don't have a very clear political space of understanding what it means to be living right now, what it means to use your body, what it means to have fear around being a female, being single, for instance, or being a young mother, you know, which is what I am at this moment, and feeling unprotected within that space is very, very complex. And so right now, I suppose my audience is that young woman who is maybe alone, or having to look after her whole family, or having to kind of make sure that their siblings go to school, or, you know, and trying to be in a space where I give them the feeling of being more powerful within the moment of doing whatever it is they're doing. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think that the subject that is present for me today is this idea of a younger generation and the people that we need to support moving forward who are going to be needing everything we've been talking about today. I am also the mother of a young woman, a 19-year-old who is developmentally disabled, and I think a lot about her in relationship to issues of autonomy and issues of safety and issues of personal health. And so to be able to have a conversation in which we can address the activism and the ways that we make our own way through the world now as a way of supporting the generation that's coming, I think is kind of the crux of the matter for us. And so one of the things that Ed Winkleman, who has arranged this panel and I was talking to about this, he asked us before we go to questions to sort of wrap up with any ideas or thoughts that you have about what next, what's the future. Sort of we can talk about what we've done, and we've sort of reviewed that here, but sort of what do you see as the next necessary steps for you to take in what you're each doing?
Well, I'd just like to mention this article that came out in today's art newspaper about abortion is normal. And if anybody's interested or lives in New York City or environments, it'll be online too. It's going to be a big show. Artists, all the names you'd recognize: Wangechi Mutu, Shirin Nishat. The only thing they left out were the guys who are also in it. Walter Robinson and Lyle Ashton Harris and Glenn Ligon. And they're all donating work that in this 2-week, 3-week period to raise as much money as possible to benefit Planned Parenthood. So if you want to know more about it, get today's art newspaper, which are free right outside the door.
I think for us, I don't want to be all doom and gloom because I do have hope. At Planned Parenthood of New York City, while we are beating back all these attacks, we are also expanding our work. And to touch a bit on your point, we're part of a 3-year grant now to be able to have a sexual health curriculum for folks with developmental disabilities because so many people in our community were asking for this service. So in 3 years, we will have hired a director of inclusive education and developed a curriculum to teach out in school. So that kind of work makes me really hopeful. I think as immediate next steps, it takes so much for one person to get an abortion in the United States. They need travel assistance, they need money, they need a provider, they need a place to stay. I would recommend looking into locally what organizations on the ground are doing that in your area. If you are not New York City based, I'm happy to stick around afterwards and connect you to a Planned Parenthood near you. And in New York City, we need people. Our offices are in Soho, and we have protesters every day. I have people who scream at me to quit my job and stop killing babies in Soho. We need people to hold the line for our patients who are entering to get care, and we need people to join us to lobby in Albany. I mentioned we passed the Reproductive Health Act, but if we don't hold our state Senate majority, there's a bill already waiting to go to the governor's desk to repeal that bill immediately. So if you want to get involved at Planned Parenthood in New York City or in a state near you, I'd love to talk to you more after the panel.
And I suppose for me, I teach at the University of the Witwatersrand, WITS, in South Africa, in Johannesburg. So right now I'm interested in sort of teaching first year, second year, and third year level, and getting into a space of, I suppose, encouraging people who are young, aspiring artists, and also people who get into the art system not really knowing if they want to be an artist. Because, I mean, for instance, for me, I was interested in forensic pathology, actually. I didn't imagine that I would be an artist. And so my path into the art world was very windy, I guess. So I suppose my space is right now is around encouraging the sort of younger generation and getting to understand how young people think and what it is that gets them motivated, I guess. And I've just finished building my studio in my backyard. And so I suppose for me right now, the sort of thought is around, I guess, workshopping and getting younger people, or even older people, I don't know, to be able to come into the studio and kind of spend a couple of days figuring out what the space of using one's body to make something is about. So I suppose I'm doing a very small or very focused space of education or activism, or, you know, so within my community more than as expensive as you guys
huge,
do.
Yeah. I mean, we need the next generation of artists for everything.
Thank you very much. I'd like to open it up for questions. If anybody has questions, I don't know, Toby, if you want people to have a microphone or not. Okay. While you all are getting your questions organized, I'll also mention that there are many other upcoming things that one can support. I know that there's a concert being planned in New York City, a large concert in January, so I hope anybody who's in the city then could look for upcoming information on that and buy tickets for that.
No questions at all?
Hi.
Yes, speak out.
Hi. I was wondering what your opinion was about the purpose of art in terms of activism. Is it to galvanize people who are already passionate about these issues? Do you think that art has the ability to change people's mind about their positions on things such as abortion? What is the goal of having, beyond raising money, of working with artists to impact social change? Like, what is the method?
Want to answer?
It makes me sort of want to take a poll of the room. Like, who in this room believes that art is engaged in invoking change? I think that certainly art has always been intentional in its relationship to wanting to offer an opinion or to give somebody a new point of view. So I think the translation of that into political action is, I think for somebody like Marilyn, for example, pretty clear.
Well, I don't know if it's, you know, I don't think artists work in metaphor more than, you know, and if it doesn't really work, illustration doesn't really work. I love Guernica. It's a perfect example. Picasso's painting about the Spanish Civil War. And I think art in terms of movies, you know, or videos really can be very powerful. But I think this sounds callous maybe, but we're really good at raising money. And that's, I think, our most, and right now we need lawyers for ACLU to support in these places that you don't even know about. All of these little tiny, Planned Parenthood centers, and it's local, and we have to target these local communities, and that's what we can do as artists. Give $5,000 to some place in Tennessee that you don't even know about. And so that's really my position. Artists can raise money.
And artists can change minds.
Oh, absolutely.
And artists can train and talk to and influence as teachers and as parents and in multiple other ways. So I think ideally we do both.
I think so, certainly.
There was a question up here.
Yeah, so you all mentioned the audiences that you were going after. Do you have... Sorry, hi. So you all mentioned a lot of your target audiences for your work. Is there a more impactful way to reach your audience? Like, have you found certain mediums or projects that had like a better result?
Making noise.
I mean, I also think that the examples that we're talking about today that are sort of like the boots on the ground issues, the issues that need to be addressed now because we're talking about serious infringement through legislature on people's basic bodily rights, is something that galvanizes people. I hope it does. And I think Marilyn, what you're saying, and Alex, what you're saying is, how to do that like now. And then I think there are more long-term strategies as well. So
you can just volunteer at any Planned Parenthood center. What can you do? Clinic Defense. This is in Soho. She walks through 200 people telling her she's killing babies every day. It's dangerous to work for Planned Parenthood.
I think also for me, when I'm like trying to really reach someone, especially when talking about abortion, is if I can find the intersection with something else they care about and sort of like get that hook, I found the conversation to be much more productive. If I can be like, here's a shared value we both agree upon, and then I'm going to tell you why it's important for you to also care about this other thing. I found that to be most productive just in one-on-one conversations. And I do think like one-on-one conversations are intensive and they take more time, but that's what really changes people's minds. That's the only way I've like had an experience with someone where they're like, now I'm thinking about that.
yeah, you're probably not going to change somebody's mind when you're being shouted at by 200 people.
Oh no, we don't talk to them.
Another question?
Hi, how are you? I'm David. I've grown up in the New York art world my whole life and involved in just so proud of what you guys are doing. But I had a question. What I was trying to kind of figure out is, I remember going back to working for John Kerry against Bush back in the day, and I remember canvassing in Ohio. And one of the things that struck me was just when you have kind of a religious right that sort of feels a certain way about something, there's kind of this wall of kind of dialogue where it kind of like you sort of can't kind of get through to a certain point. And one of the things I was kind of thinking about, it just kind of occurred to me during this, is the powerful imagery and the using of that to kind of influence minds. And I'm trying to think about if anybody here has any thoughts on what we could do effectively without necessarily offending somebody who doesn't agree with, abortion and women's right to choose. What can we do to kind of help create that dialogue? Because I think that, we can, in New York and in places that are safe havens or that really, really get it and really understand it, that's great. But I think the real issue, in my opinion, also is that cultural fight, and how do we address that? Through art. So.
Are you asking anyone specific?
All of you.
You want to answer that?
Yeah, I can start. You should chime in though. I think there are a lot of great organizations doing that work. There's a great organization called Catholics for Choice, and their whole mission is it's a religious organization, and they use the language of their faith to talk about why birth control and abortion is important to them. And I think those faith-based conversations are really important. I think anytime someone who practices any religion, I think, Catholicism and Christianity has sort of like cornered the market on this conversation, but just saying like I practice this faith and that is not representative of my viewpoint. I love Viva's work so much because I think the Thank God for Abortion work, because I think she is someone who practices spirituality, and she's really reclaiming like, I believe in a really loving, forgiving, not even forgiving because you don't need to be forgiven, but a welcoming God, and this is how I'm bringing my piece of religion into this conversation.
The only thing I've ever seen that changes people's mind is radical empathy, where people actually, you get a gun rights activist, and you get the mother of a child that was killed in one of these massacres from some other kid walking into some elementary school and shooting up the elementary school, and they tell each other their story in the same room. It's the only place where people change their minds, and then they have to retell what the other person said. They tell the story, and then you tell and everyone cries, and everybody sort of finds some common ground. But I don't know what else there is. I can't see it anywhere.
I think for me, in terms of the space of offending somebody, I think that the action of even being alive is so political that it will offend someone. So I think we're never going to be in a space where something that we do or don't do doesn't offend somebody in the world somewhere. So I think for me, the answer to your question is to continue working, and being in a situation where one is open to have conversation. Because if I wasn't willing to travel from South Africa for 27 hours to come and sit and speak with you, perhaps you just seeing my work would give you a particular impression, But unless we have that conversation around what my intention is, and then I hear what you thought around what I was doing, we're never really going to get anywhere, So I think that space of being able to speak with one another.
And as a curator, I'm sitting here thinking about all of the art on the other side of this wall. As we know, so much of truly compelling and the best art has a way of speaking both to its current time and to sort of transcending that time. And the thing that is typically transcendent is, I think what we're all talking about, is the place in which people can see a common humanity. So that a work of art, I'm thinking about Felix Gonzalez Torres in relationship to his experience in the AIDS crisis, or any number of artists. You mentioned Guernica. I'm thinking of more political work, but also more subtle abstract work that over time, the politics of it becomes humanized in a way that I think invites a dialogue. I think that's one of the things that art over the long term can really do in a really profound way. One more question?
I was Bob Rauschenberg's fabricator for the last 25 years of his life, and Merce Cunningham and John Cage and Bob. And Bob had a world tour, the Rockies show, and Bob believed that we have to learn to live together, we have to learn about everybody, and we should take care of everybody. And it seems that a matriarchal society would be much better because women seem to care more and men seem to want to control more.
Yeah, but that's a pretty impressive group of activists who committed themselves over a really long time to changing a lot of dialogues too. But yeah, go matriarchy.
Go for it.
Yeah. I think there was one more question over here.
Hi. My question's about the accessibility of these sort of conversations, and I'm just wondering what you all think about where these conversations are happening. Like, art as a mechanism for change is often sort of, I don't want to use the word elitist, but it can generally cater to the people who are surrounded by it and who are in these spaces where they can access it. So,
I think one of the most interesting areas of creativity and activism and art is the intersection right now between multiple communities around issues of health, and whether that's disability or whether it's the issue of spaces of caring, and different kinds of, I feel like there's a very strong move towards a different approach to thinking about how communities support each other in relationship to emotional needs and to health needs. And I feel like I see so much art about that now that is collective and really has a different kind of emotional value. And I find that, to talk about hope, I find that very encouraging, to think about issues of care as a kind of political action, how people in various communities support each other and take care of each other.
I guess for me, the space of accessibility is something I've been thinking about, and this is why I teach, for instance, you know, and having the sort of thought around this open studio in a way where, you know, I think that the space of being able to, even if it's workshop with like children who are like 3, for instance, is a space where you get them to kind of open up and even in a very small sort of scale, enrich somebody's life, you know, and give them a safe space to kind of explore what they think or explore how to think, you know. So I think for me, the sort of educational space is how I deal with accessibility.
Yeah, I think for us, we as Planned Parenthood, we need to go everywhere and talk to everyone. And you know, Catherine just said the Keith Haring Mobile Health Center is a great example of that. There's a really wonderful quote when we opened our new one that Keith brought art to the people, and now his legacy will bring healthcare to the people. And I think that that is so powerful. And also for us, like, we try to find young artists in our community who we can pay to do work for us and use that as a way to reach people in their in their age bracket on social media. So we're always thinking about like, how can we use like the recognizable name of Planned Parenthood to uplift people in our community who are creating art that speaks directly to our issues. And for us, I really firmly believe that there is not a single person who isn't touched by the work that we do. These are issues that everyone has to care about. So I think the more places we can bring the conversation, the better.
And we talked about briefly just also how you address issues of reproductive health for people who don't necessarily identify as female, but that reproductive health and bodily autonomy are sort of politically important conversations across multiple communities, not just women-identified women.
Absolutely, and that's why we're proud to offer gender-affirming hormone therapy for the trans community at all 5 of our health centers. And that was a really rigorous process that we made sure that all of our clinicians were trained to treat people respectfully. When you go into our health center, people ask for your pronouns, they respect your gender identity, and that's really important to us. And we've also made a commitment to being more inclusive in our language when talking about abortion so that people see themselves reflected in what we are saying about our values.
Marilyn, you got a parting thought?
Buy art.
Thank you. Thank you very much.